Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live podcast interview. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Third Stage Consulting. I'm going to introduce our guest here in just a moment. We're doing this interview live in our studio, which we haven't done before. So This is kind of fun to be in person instead of over the usual Zoom style interview. So this will be a fun conversation today. Today's topic is planning for ERP implementations in 2024. What are some of the things you need to do to be aware of or to be thinking about as you go through a digital transformation in the coming year? And this is meant to focus on those of you that might be getting ready to start an ERP implementation or a digital transformation in 2024. And you're trying to think about the things you need to do to get ready. What are the planning steps and some of the strategies you could be getting in place now to get ready for that implementation? Before I introduce our guest here in just a moment, who I'm excited to have here with me, just a couple of logistical things. First of all, we do this live stream every Tuesday, same time, same place. So this is a live interview that we get audience questions. So we really would love to hear any questions you have along the way. So if you don't mind just dropping in the chat to get started, what city and country you're joining from today. Love to see where in the world you're joining from today. We usually get a global community. So if you don't mind just dropping in the chat, wherever you're watching here today, what city and country are you joining from today? And in that same chat feature, you can also ask any questions you have along the way. So be sure to drop those in the chat as we get through the conversation here. Second thing, this interview becomes part of the weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So every week we publish a podcast called Transformation Ground Control. This interview becomes part of that episode that'll come out next week. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And if you don't subscribe to the podcast, you can just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the past episodes we've had. And thank you for those of you that are already dropping in the chat where you're joining from today. So our topic today, planning for ERP implementations in 2024. I already mentioned my name is Eric Kimberling, CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent technology agnostic consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformations. And joining me today is AV. Tell us about yourself, AV. Thank you for being here, first of all.
No, thanks for having me. This is I'm glad to be part of the first in-studio experience, the Eric Kimberling experience. Is that the next one? No, I'm AV. I'm Abhijit Verekar. I'm the founder and CEO at Avero Advisors. We are an independent digital transformation and ERP consulting firm that focuses on the public sector across the United States. And we've been working with Eric for almost a year now. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we were just talking last night at dinner. We were talking about how it's been just exactly a year this month that we first met. So our teams met at the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies conference or gala, and that's where our teams first met and how we've gotten to know each other. It feels like longer, but it's only been a year.
It does, and congratulations, by the way, on 2 years in a row.
Yeah. How many years in a row for you?
3.
Yeah. You got to speed on that one, but that's it. That's the only thing you're going to beat us.
No.
Just kidding. So tell us about your background. So you founded Avero several years ago, but tell us about your career. What led you here?
Yeah. So I'm an accountant and finance person. I've got 2 master's degrees in accounting. And as I finished my second master's degree, I realized I didn't want to be an accountant. So fell into consulting in like almost 20 years ago, joined a consulting firm in Cleveland, Ohio as an intern, and fell in love with it because I can meld my financial background and accounting expertise with technology and help solve client problems. So did that for about 15 years before I started Avero in 2016. Yeah, it's been a fun ride. I enjoy this profession. I know you do too, and that's one of the many reasons that we get along.
Yeah, because we have common interest in consulting. We both kind of stumbled into it too. Yes. I never planned to be a consultant, just like you. It just sort of happened, and then you try it, and then you learn to love it over time.
Yeah. I don't think anyone plans to do it. Most consultants I've met, they stumble into it from some other background. They've developed some deep expertise in an area of their life or curriculum, and they've done some work in the industry, and that expertise leads them to consulting. But our path was not like that. We stumbled into it, which I think is a good way of doing it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I want to turn to the audience real quick just to acknowledge where everyone's joining from here today. Obviously, AV and I are here in Denver. When I say this is our studio, this is actually my office. And AV was kind enough to help me set up this little makeshift studio that could accommodate 2 people instead of, I usually sit right across the room here at my desk, and we had to kind of move everything over. So you're like kind of video production guy here today along with me. So thank you for helping. But joining a lot of people joining from all over the world here today. David from Germany on YouTube is here. Thank you, David. James from Hereford, UK. Jesus from Spain. We've got someone from Toronto, India, Dallas, Texas, Denver, Colorado, San Diego, California, London. So thank you everyone for joining wherever you are today. People all over the world. So great to have you all here today. And this is a topic that has global implications, right? It doesn't matter where in the world you are. This is stuff that is going to be relevant to you as you get ready for your transformations. I'd also love to hear in the chat, if you don't mind, just dropping in the chat where you are right now in your ERP or digital transformation journey as you look to 2024. Are you getting ready to start one? Are you in the middle of one? Are you a consultant maybe that's trying to assist with one or more? So love to hear your perspectives from that. We have someone from Knoxville here too, by the way, which is where you're from.
Go Vols.
Yep. So I guess just to start, before we dive into the implementation planning process and sort of what it takes to get ready for an ERP implementation, let's talk about first maybe some just general trends. What are the big trends that you and your clients are seeing in the space that we should be aware of if we're planning for an ERP implementation in 24?
Yeah, so we work with governments. So our clientele tends to be slightly behind, and sometimes by design compared to private sector. So what I'm seeing, or we're seeing, is a fast adoption of cloud technologies and SaaS, which you probably saw 2 years ago.
Right.
But it's accelerating. The offerings that are coming to our clients are more varied now. Clients, companies like Workday and Oracle and NetSuite are really interested in the public sector market, the mid-level market. Prior to this, they were really only going after the large clients. So that's one thing. The adoption of AI, there's a lot of curiosity, but no real products. Right? I think 24 will show us some real products, some real enhancements in existing technologies with AI. And I'm really excited about natural language reporting so that, accountants like me can just go ask questions to their ERP system without having to run down to IT to have a custom report made. I think that's what's going to come in to play next year. I don't think it's too far out. Everything that Microsoft is doing with Copilot, that we are seeing, not yet able to play with it, right? If you have some expertise in Azure and you can go behind the scenes and play with the OpenAI APIs. But I think the consumers will start seeing all of that as products next year.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, same thing. And I have a follow-up question. I'll come back and add some additional thoughts here. But you said something that's really interesting. You said the government's a little bit further behind, and so they're doing things that maybe private sector was doing a couple of years ago. And I think even in the private sector, you have a lot of companies that are at different degrees of digital maturity. Some are more mature than others. For those organizations that might be listening here today that are further behind, let's say, and they get enamored by all these new features and bells and whistles of enterprise technology like AI or whatever it is, how do you help clients sort of incrementally get there without jumping too far, making too big of a leap too soon?
Our approach is getting them to do a strategic plan, be it technology, all technology or just ERP systems. No matter what you do, you need a plan, right? Because these projects are once in a lifetime. If done right, you won't have to do this again. Right? If you don't do it right, you're going to do another ERP implementation, and these aren't fun projects to go through. So first of all, you need to have a plan. What does this mean to your organization? How are business processes going to change? How are people going to change? How are you're going to manage the change in business processes and people's roles? That needs to be defined first. Then you need to look at your business processes, things that you've been doing for the last 30 years on pen and paper, even Excel. That's going to change and get automated. You need to map all of this out on paper, on Visio, on BlueWorks Live, what have you, before you go and select a product, right? Because that's going to dictate or educate you on what product's going to fit your needs the best.
Yeah.
So visioning, to-be process mapping, requirements definition, all of the things that are considered to be time-consuming and boring are actually the most important things to do. In an ERP implementation.
Yeah, and so many of those boring things that you have to do are prerequisites to getting to the more advanced technologies.
Absolutely.
So if you think about like AI, you have a client who has, let's say they've got messy data, systems aren't integrated, they're in silos. AI is too big of a jump if you're in that setting. So you've got to figure out in that roadmap, to your point, how do you define your processes to where you've got better data flow, integration of data? Then you can start thinking about AI at that point once you've got that. But you can't just jump straight to AI.
No, and you have to also think about infrastructure, right? It's often overlooked. You want to move from on-premise to the cloud, or go from having a system in your basement to a SaaS product. You can't do that if you have jacked up networking and not good servers and no bandwidth.
Right.
So there's another layer to that. You have to look at your infrastructure, look at how you're set up, what your bandwidth is, what your fail-safe failovers are. How are you going to do backup? Because we've seen clouds being hacked, right? Big companies losing data. Google Drive lost data,
Right.
a couple of weeks ago. So it's not fail-safe. So you always have to have an infrastructure plan that plans for all of these things.
Yeah, for sure. It's also, are you seeing any in the public sector? Are you seeing any shifts or trends as it relates to specific software solutions or software providers that are becoming more prominent or less prominent than you've seen in years past? Or what are the trends you're seeing there?
Yeah, in the last year or two, we're seeing more involvement by Workday and Oracle in the mid-tier market. And when I say that, there's a few big cities, New York, Denver, San Francisco, what have you, the large metros that are really being served historically by the big software players, right? We haven't seen them come bid on RFPs or chase clients like the city of Knoxville or the city of Cleveland. So tier 2, tier 3 cities are now getting attention from these big players, which is exciting because there was a lack of choice throughout my career in public sector. You saw, mom and pop resellers trying to patch together an SAP implementation without understanding what government does or the business of government. But now companies like Oracle, Workday, Oracle NetSuite is going after smaller clients across the country. They've really thought this out. The gov strategy is pretty strong, and they're giving companies like Tyler Technologies a run for their money in that mid to low section of the market.
Right.
Yeah. So it's good for the clientele because there's more choice, and they're going to get true SaaS service rather than just something stuck in the cloud.
Yeah. We're seeing the same thing in other verticals too in the private sector. SAP is another example. SAP with S/4HANA now is going down market. They're with the Grow platform. They're trying to take S/4HANA and scale it down for the mid market. So it's really interesting for any organization that's a mid-tier, mid-size organization. They've got a lot of options, both the big players coming down market to support their needs, and then the smaller NetSuites of the world or whatever vendors that typically focus on the space. Yeah, really interesting. Let's turn to the audience and see what kind of questions we have here, because there's a lot of, I see the chats coming through. I just haven't read all the questions yet. So here's a question that I want to get to. There are just a couple comments here on where people are in their journey here. James on LinkedIn says that he's a consultant project manager halfway through the build phase with go live scheduled mid-2024 on Microsoft D365. So thank you. That's very specific point in his journey.
Yes, and D365 also is seeing a resurgence, right? Yeah. I'm sure you're seeing that too. Just like S/4HANA, SAP Cloud, D365 is making a resurgence.
Yeah.
So all good news for our clients.
Yeah, lots of options for sure, but very different options too. A lot of these vendors you're talking about, Workday, Oracle, Oracle Fusion, Oracle NetSuite, SAP, D365. These are all Workday. These are all very different solutions.
Yes.
So it's interesting. You have a lot of good options that are very different. Yeah. Here's a question from or a comment here from Oscar on LinkedIn. Oscar says, I found that many clients don't plan their business transformation projects sufficiently. They're not mapping business processes sufficiently. They don't have any change management in place ahead of the system implementation and tend to have resistance from the business to change. And so I'll pop the comment here up on the screen so everyone can see it. Thank you, Oscar, for that great comment. You talked about business process already and how important that is to get ready for your overall roadmap and using that as sort of a baseline for how you're going to deploy new technology. We haven't talked yet about change management. How does change management fit into what you were describing earlier about having that blueprint in the business process?
It's extremely important. The first thing you need to do is talk to your users, people that are going to be using this system. And I've run into a few situations where, for example, this client is going from PeopleSoft to Oracle HCM in the cloud, PeopleSoft on-prem, Oracle HCM in the cloud. And they're considering this an upgrade. It's just an upgrade. We're just going to, get Oracle or a reseller to come in and do an upgrade. And when asked if you've talked to your HR department or your largest departments, and the answer was no, why should I talk to them? Because their requirements are pie in the sky was the answer. So that's a wrong approach to OCM, because you're going to run into a problem here pretty quickly when you unleash this new system on users. So change management starts from the time that you decide to switch systems or upgrade systems, because your end users need to be involved. You can't just run this as a CIO or CTO from your office without talking to the end users. That's step one. And throughout the implementation, you have to do, there's a lot of theories about change management, and they're all useful, but the most useful thing is talking to people like they're people and understanding that any change is going to upend their lives. Because a lot of people are very invested in the work they do, and have been doing great work using older systems and patched together Excel sheets for a long time. So you have to be considerate of what they're about to go through.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best approach to change management.
Yeah. What about, do you ever have clients or executives, especially at
Yeah.
your clients, where they say, that sounds great. Yeah, we need to do change management, but we're not too worried about it because our people are really excited for the change. The old systems suck. New system's great. They want this new system. So yeah, we might do a little bit of change management. We don't really need to. Do you hear that from executives?
All the time. All the time.
How do you counter that, or what do you say to that?
What I just said, right? It's like if you're a child, you ate all the fun stuff on the plate first. You have to go back and eat your vegetables. You can't leave the table.
Yeah,
it's a must thing to do, right? Because if you don't do change management right, if you don't care for the people that are going through this change, and I'm being very soft about this, right? There's theories on how to do it, and communications, and newsletters, and videos like this, and we've done all of that. But if your executives don't put a lot of value into effective and accurate change management, you're going to be in trouble, because you can do everything right, but if you don't have adoption from the users, the system's not going to work for you.
Yeah.
What's been your experience with that?
Same thing. I mean, it starts at the beginning, like you said, like from the moment you embark on an evaluation, really. I mean, even when you're evaluating potential systems, you need to involve people at that point, and that gets them excited. And usually what we find is that you have this sort of a curve where during the selection process, people get more and more excited, because now you see the opportunity. You see, oh, this great new technology is so much better than what we're using now, or mainframe's going to go away, or green screens, or whatever, our old system's going to go away. Now we've got this great new fun system we can use. And then you select, at the time you select the software, usually that's sort of the peak. That's the peak excitement. And then it starts to drop off. And sometimes it just drops off a cliff, because people start to freak out when they realize that this is a lot harder
work there is.
Yeah. And now you're going to change my job. Now you're going to change everything I do that I've been doing for the 20 years the same way. Now you're going to change that and tell me I've got to use a new technology, new processes, and it just turns into a threat. And so you've got to turn it. You're never going to stop those peaks and valleys, but you can minimize the drop. It's where people get.
And a great way of doing that is, again, doing it upfront, right? As you do business process redesign, as you do requirements, you're getting people to think about how processes, their lives are going to change, their work's going to change. And our process is doing that without talking about what system they're going to get. Right. Because it really gets people that have been using a green screen or an AS400 for 30 years to think about how life could be different if they didn't have to maintain these spreadsheets that keep breaking because they're interlinked and it's on some server that was destroyed in some fire. You've heard those stories too, right? So as you're doing process redesign, as you're doing requirements definition, that's a great time to start talking about change. And those are great tools that become part of your change management routine.
Yeah. And one thing we advise clients on too, if you're getting ready for a transformation in 24 ERP implementation, is part of your plan needs to include the change management. I think a lot of times companies say, well, let's figure out the technological roadmap first. And then as we get into it, we'll figure out the change management stuff later. And the problem is change management is oftentimes on the critical path. Like you've got to get through that stuff and you have to know how long will the change really take, or else it doesn't matter how fast the technology moves if your people aren't moving. So you've got to have that plan as part of your overall strategy and implementation plan.
And there's different flavors to that, right? Change management doesn't always mean a 2-year-long implementation and change plan. You can have a change management. You should have a change management plan for smaller upgrades. Even if you're replacing, keyboards or desktop screens, that's change. And you need to do that in a way that doesn't disrupt people's day-to-day work. So we see that a lot, because we do a lot of infrastructure work. So some vendor will say, we're going to upgrade your servers tonight. or the IT department says we're going to upgrade backups tomorrow, something like that. And they don't give the end users the chance to say, no, we have a critical thing going on,
Yeah.
or to prepare for it, or have a change window. So change management is critical in all aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you on that. Let's see. There was a comment from one of our team members here. Let's see. Sorry, I just had this question pulled up and I got so many more after it that I lost it. Here it is. Here's a question from, do you ever see that movie Elf?
Yes.
The Christmas movie,
Yeah.
since we're in
Yeah, one of my
Christmas
favorite.
holiday here. You know that scene where they announced that Santa's coming to the store and Will Ferrell, Elf,
Yeah.
freaks out, says, I
Yeah.
know him.
Yeah.
Well, this is someone that I know. It's Megan from Knoxville, Tennessee, who's part of your team. So I was just thinking, I know her. Just like Elf. But Megan says, how should local governments, and I'll expand this question a little bit if you don't mind, Megan, but how should organizations in general approach a cost-benefit analysis when considering an investment in a new ERP system? She's asking specifically for government, but
Yeah,
I think it applies to both.
I think the answer differs, right? It's hard to nail down a financial ROI for governments. You can make assumptions and come up with some numbers. Are they real? More often than not, it's the efficiencies you're saving on that's not necessarily tied to money. That you're becoming more efficient, you can do more with less, you can do things faster and better, be more transparent to the public. Those are the kind of metrics we need to track. In the private sector, though, it's real dollars and cents that you can see being saved, or efficiencies that lead to more profits. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, you have to quantify where you think the value is going to come from, and really, I think the key is to not be too pie in the sky. Like a lot of times you see organizations that will say, what if we reduce our inventory by 25% or reduce our procurement cost by 50%, whatever it is. And those numbers, okay, they could be real, but they might also be complete guesses. So I think the key is to determine exactly how and where you're going to get those savings. And what that does by digging down and not just saying we're going to save 25% on inventory savings or cutting our inventory costs by 25%. It's more where, like, which is there a certain warehouse or in the public sector procurement, where are we going to save that money? Where's the big low hanging fruit? And what do we really think that this technology could do for us? And then you start to look at, well, which modules do you need from the technology, and how much does that cost relative to what you're going to save? And that really helps you prioritize too in that roadmap as you think about the planning phases of knowing you're not going to bite off everything all at once. You're going to presumably do kind of a phased approach. And this helps you prioritize quite a bit by specifying exactly where you're going to get the savings. But also, one step further, I would say that you should also have that benefits realization plan too, of who's, how are you going to get it? Who's accountable for those savings, and what are you going to do to optimize the value?
I think defining what a return means to you in this ERP scenario is important. Again, goes back to start from the beginning. What does success look like, and how are you going to measure it? Right. If you have that definition from the get-go, that becomes your goal, that becomes part of the vision, and becomes part of like the guiding light as you go through a difficult implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't have that guiding light, then when you get into tough decisions that are difficult to make, like, should we customize this little piece of the software? I don't know. Customization is generally viewed as bad in the industry or in these projects, but it might be good if it adds material value to what you can get out of the system. Yeah, it's great stuff. So thank you for that question, Megan. Let's see here. See, the only problem with the in-studio approach here that I'm finding is I'm so used to looking at the camera and all the questions are right here, so I don't have to look back and forth. So now I'm a little behind. So if
that's fine, I'll look at the camera while you look at questions.
Just awkwardly stare in silence at the camera while I figure this out. Here's an interesting point or a comment from LinkedIn, and it's I'll just read you the comment. Part of the challenge is the arrogance of IT for entering a solution phase while not understanding end user experience. They are stuck in ivory towers of technology. What do you think of that? Do you agree with that?
All day. Look, I love my CIO, CTO friends, and I say this to them too. Like, pay attention to the end user. And yes, it sometimes becomes an ivory tower situation where they're looking down and saying, "What do you know about technology? Let me just do this upgrade, and your life's going to be better." without understanding, what they're going to bring on to the end user group. And it's not just the end users. Your director levels, your executives that rely on a system to get data to make decisions. It's going to be upside down if you're not dealing with them and their requirements in the first place.
Right.
So we constantly talk about it to our friends in IT about how to do this. And the good ones take that advice, and they're the best suited to take this advice and this approach and do it right, because they understand technology. The flip side is your business users don't necessarily understand what goes into an implementation, why a certain system might be better for you, and then you have the opposite problem of not understanding technology enough but wanting pie in the sky things.
Yeah.
Like, we want AI enabled systems, but your infrastructure is terrible. You
Right.
can't get there without spending a lot of money and time on infrastructure.
Right. Yeah. So it's like you have to do both. You
Yeah.
have to have that vision of how the infrastructure could support it, but you have to tie it back to the business value and what that end state back
The
to your
outcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just define the outcomes before you go through this.
Yeah. Yeah. And back to your point about business processes you were talking about earlier, like laying out what your future state vision for your operations and your processes are, that should enable or lead to what the technology solutions are, rather than starting with technology, then figuring out the business processes, which is backwards.
Which is, it's interesting. We had a question from a client yesterday, or a prospect rather. They went through a business process redesign with a vendor. So their incumbent vendor, which is, in the K through 12 space, they're like legacy dinosaurs, and I'm not going to name them, but they went through a business process redesign with this vendor who they're considering getting rid of. And they want us to use this BPR to take this project further. So our response was, their question was, can we use this BPR to save some money on your services? And we're like, yeah, but it's not going to be useful because it was made, or you went through this from the lens of this vendor that you don't like. So the BPR is focused on how can we make this product work for you, or how can we make you work for the product. So it's upside down. BPR should be done without thinking about what product you're going to come implement. It should be the first thing you do in really understanding what your business practices are today and how they'll change, how they should change with modern automation. And that's where we come in, right? We can tell our clients that, these 7 steps you do in the PO process are now done automatically. You just cancel that whole lane over there.
Yeah.
And this is now automated. Therefore, it saves you 2 days of manual labor.
Yeah.
And that's the future state. A lot of times clients don't know what's out there because this is the only thing they know.
Yeah.
So it's our job to educate, map, and then make sure that they're getting what they are envisioning or asking for from the vendors.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's I'll come back to the question for you to follow up. But when you define those business processes objectively and agnostically, which is what you're talking about, it really does focus on business. It's not focused on the technology. And a lot of times people, or especially vendors, will say, no, that's backwards, AB. You shouldn't do your business processes agnostically. You should do it based on the technology, because that's what they want. That's best for them.
Yeah.
But that's not the right answer, because you need it to drive your business, and then you figure out how the technology is going to fit within it. And if there's a discrepancy, which there will be some discrepancy of what you want your future state process to be versus what the technology can do, then sure, now you've got to reconcile. But at least now you can target, you can focus on that decision. Like, this piece is a discrepancy. What are we going to do? We're going to change it. Are we okay with changing our business process, or are we okay customizing and making it fit our desired future state? So, and the last thing you want to, last thing I'll say about that too, is the last thing you want is for a vendor to be coming to you and saying, well, yeah, AV, just because you have a discrepancy here between those business processes you just laid out and the way our technology works, that's not our problem. It's your problem. You don't want to change.
Yeah.
And then there's so many times where we're working with vendors and you say, yeah, we don't want to change to something lesser, like a watered down version of the way we want things to work. That's if that's resistance to change, then sure, so be it.
Yeah.
So
there's just different flavors of business process redesign, right? There's 2 schools of thought, and this is one of my passion areas, right? Process redesign. There's 2 schools of thought. One is your systems and processes are so broken that you don't even want to deal with current processes. You blow everything up, bring in a new system, and let's just redesign the whole thing. The second school of thought is it's 60% broken. Let's see if we can fix it. Are we not using the system right? Are our business processes so screwed up that the system can't do it? So let's look at it from that perspective. So anytime we go into a client, that's the question I ask. Where do you see yourself, right? Do you want to blow everything up, burn the world down,
right,
and start anew? Or is there something salvageable in this? And the approach then depends on where we are.
Yeah.
Based on our assumptions and assessment, what the client thinks what stage they're in. So different flavors.
Yeah. So I have to ask, was this K through 12 customer, you said they were considering or looking at the incumbent that's outdated? Is it Infor Lawson?
No.
Okay. I was sure you were talking about Infor Lawson. And you probably wouldn't have told me even if I was right?
We can't name. Okay.
Yeah, we can't bash vendors on the show. I would never say anything negative about a vendor or a big system integrator. I would never.
Me neither.
Just kidding. Here's a good question from Dan Aldridge on YouTube. Thank you for being here, Dan. Dan's a regular.
Dr. Dan.
Dr. Dan, ERP doctor. That's his name. He came to our Stratosphere conference, so you and I have met him in person. Thanks for being here, Dan. Do you think that the missing functionality in S4HANA and struggles with ECC to S4HANA upgrades will cause SAP customers to leave for other ERP systems? This is a great question.
It is a great question. I don't know. I mean, if it impacts business processes, right? We've had clients that have left SAP. They were in process of moving from legacy SAP to S4HANA and decided not to. Like the CFO put his foot down and said, no way, I'm sticking with this product. Let's go out to RFP. And we've been helping them pick, a different product. So I don't know in detail what that means.
Yeah.
So maybe you do.
Yeah, it's, I think the date they've set is 2027 that you have to be off of VCC and not to S4HANA. Or they're going to stop supporting ECC. I think it's 2027. It might be 2030. If someone from the SAP world can correct me or needs to correct me, please do. Regardless of what the date is, honestly, it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is the same, which is they're forcing customers to make a switch, maybe or maybe not prematurely from what they should be doing. So I think at best, what it's doing is it's creating I think it's a PR nightmare for SAP. I think it's a disaster. But the good news for SAP is they're not the only ones doing it. It doesn't make it okay, but Microsoft's doing the same thing. Oracle's doing the same thing. They're all doing it. All the vendors are basically saying, we're done with the on-prem model. These legacy systems are going away, which they have to at some point. But what it's doing is it's compressing the time frame for all these companies and organizations through the world to switch over to S4HANA or whatever the system is. So it's almost like you have to pick your poison. Are you that pissed off at SAP for them forcing you that you're going to go find another vendor that's also doing the same thing as their customers? I think that's the luxury SAP has. And I think that's a problem in the industry, honestly.
I think some are handling it better than others, right? There's a way to sunset older systems. It's a fact of life. But let's take, for example, the whole Kronos UKG transition, right? UKG buys Kronos, and what they've done is, and this is not bashing, these are true stories. They, at least to this one client of ours, it was sold as an upgrade. It's just a sticker change. Nothing's going to change for you. We're going to go from calling it Kronos to calling it UKG. Couldn't be farther from the truth. It was a brand new implementation with a third party involved, and they didn't look at any of the documentation. And the kickoff meeting started with, tell me what your vision is for the future of your department or something like that. It was like, what? Now, this is a new implementation? You said it was an upgrade or just a sticker change. So that one has not been well managed. And it's not just one client. Anywhere you go, you do the same thing.
Right.
And it comes down to who it is that's charged with the implementation, right? The third party that they're bringing in to implement the solution are not very good. And it's giving them a bad rep, right? And a good point to be made there is Kronos was always in the cloud, especially at this client of ours. It's not moving from on-prem to the cloud. It's just moving to a different platform, but that wasn't made transparent.
It's often sold as a lift and shift.
It is.
You're just moving. We're doing some things behind the scenes, but S4HANA, ECC to S4HANA is the same thing. It's a totally different system. It's a different architecture, different database structure, different user interface. But at the same time, I guess the caveat to that is there is some tribal knowledge benefit that you have that some similarities, I guess you'd say, from ECC to S4HANA, not enough to justify it being an easy upgrade by any means, but there is some value in something to be said with sticking with it. And I think that's what a lot of these bigger organizations struggle with, is you have so much tribal knowledge and deep competency in a certain product like ECC. It's hard to justify going completely abandoning that and going in a totally different direction.
But I think the communication and management of that change is the key, because Kronos was about to be, officially it's being sunset Q1 of next year, of 24.
Right.
But no client is ready with UKG as far as I know.
Right.
So that date is kind of fuzzy, right? And our advice to our client is push back. If this thing isn't ready, what are you going to do? Not pay 3,000 people on that day?
Yeah.
That's not acceptable. So the vendor community needs to do better with the sunset plans in general.
Yeah, totally agree. And managing expectations and also just being empathetic with their clients. I think that's where a lot of vendors, I don't know if I showed the question or not yet, or if I've gotten to the question, but someone in the chat used the word arrogance. I think maybe they're talking about, it might've been a different question, but I think the vendors, and SAP is one of the vendors where I think there's a certain amount of arrogance that they have, and sort of disregard for customer needs, and saying, and it's all about them. It's like, we need to get off this legacy system, therefore you need to get off the system. And we're basically going to hold a gun to your head and tell you you've got to switch now. And if you think about it from a business perspective, it's a smart gamble on SAP's part, I guess, because they're going to get most customers, if not an overwhelming majority, are going to switch over to S/4HANA. So it'll probably work. They might lose some customers. There might be some collateral damage along the way, but I think most customers will probably end up switching, and they'll end up better off for it financially. I don't know that the customers will, but SAP will definitely end up better off for it. So here's an interesting question from Ryan on LinkedIn. And he asked the question, what strategies do you recommend for ensuring scalability in ERP systems as a company or an organization grows? Like, in other words, when you're implementing a new system, maybe to add to this a little bit, how do you plan for the future? You implement what you need today, but how do you ensure that it's what you need tomorrow as you grow and change as an organization?
I think it's easier with SaaS, right? In the cloud, you don't have infrastructure issues, so it's easier to grow, but to grow, but you still need to plan for it. In the public sector, it's easier. Organizations don't change that much. They might add 100 people over 20 years. But generally it's frowned upon to add headcounts to governments. So, and the operation doesn't themselves change unless you're doing something really strategically critical, like merging two cities or making a city-county organization. That's when you really have to think about systems and how they're going to merge and scale. But again, it comes down to requirements definition, going back to the vision. What do you see your business doing in the next 10 years? And is the system going to scale? And by scale, do you mean the number of users, or do you mean the number of modules and the amount of transactions it can process? I think, again, with SaaS, if you negotiate well, you're not tying yourself into per transaction fees in some cases. You can easily scale. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. You're taking IT maintenance and IT infrastructure out of the equation. And a lot of times that's a bottleneck to growth and scalability, is that I've got to change my entire infrastructure, or I've got to change my system to get it to scale as we grow. Whereas now with the cloud and SaaS model, the vendors are doing that on an ongoing basis. Now it does create other disruptions. Now all of a sudden you might be changing too much, because the system's changing whether you want it to or not. And the upgrades are happening behind the scenes whether you like it or not. So that's the bigger issue, back to the change management discussion. That's what you got to manage now. So you solved one problem of scalability, which is that IT maintenance infrastructure side of things. But now you've created a new problem with scalability, which is now there's more shocks to the system and more change that you have to go through as an organization, for better or for worse. Yeah, good question though. Thank you for that question, Ryan. Just a comment from Kyler on LinkedIn, and another elf moment. I know her. I know her. She's part of the Third Stage team. And bear with me, I just lost the feed. There it is. Kyler says the power of messaging and perception is real. It's a very good comment. Back to the change management thread there. Wow, there's a lot of chat here. Thank you for the great questions. I'm going to try and get to as many as we can. Here's an interesting question from Mackenzie on LinkedIn. Mackenzie says, what is your favorite example of the long-term benefits of successful change management on the efficiency and effectiveness of public sector organizations? So I'll read it again because it's a good question. It's just, there's a lot there. What is your favorite example of long-term benefits of successful change management on the efficiency and effectiveness of a public sector organization?
Yeah, it's easy for me. Our first and my favorite client, Blount County, Tennessee, like we started with, their RFP was, I think, 3 words long. We need help with computers, is what it said. I'm exaggerating. It was
Right.
simple. So when we were picked, the first thing we did was create a long-term plan. What we found was, they had a CIO that was there for 30 plus years that had abruptly left, went somewhere else. There was no training, no documentation, and the whole county ran on this AS400 system that he had built himself. And again, there was nothing documented. It was IBM series that hadn't been kept up for licensing. So they could have been hit with some, ransomware for sure, but also license avoidance fees or what have you. So we had a long-term plan. We created a 5-year plan for them, went to their council and commissions and sought the funding, convinced everybody that they need to spend money on this, otherwise they're going to be in deep trouble. And it took us 5 years to get from point A to point Z. And along the way, we upgraded everything from their networking gear to their wiring to fiber optics to how they do backups, taking major systems to the cloud and replacing the main ERP system from the green screen to something in the cloud, SaaS-based, all within 5 years. So that's at the speed of lightning for government, but along the way it was successful because there was buy-in from the top to the bottom. Everybody was ready for change, and we did it right. We had good communications, we had good buy-in, we had good expectation management. Of course, it was bumpy at times,
Right.
but I think that's the best example I can think of where we've done this right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the question's a good one because, and the example's a great one too, because what McKinsey is alluding to, without saying it directly necessarily, is that change management can and should add real business value.
Mhm.
Like, it's not, I know we've talked about it in the context of how do you get people to come along and how do you mitigate the impact of change and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's not just about making people feel good. It's about the real business value. And I think that's what a lot of executives don't understand, is it's not like we're just advocating, you and I are not advocating change management just because people are going to feel good.
Mhm.
That will be a secondary unintended consequence of it or result of it. But the real reason you do change management, if you're doing it right, is to get business value. And so I love this question because you are focused on, we at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want efficiency and effectiveness, like she says.
Well, and we say this a lot. I know I've heard you say this. These aren't technology. I mean, it's a tech project, but it's a people project first, right? Technology is a tool. So this is where the ivory tower comes in, right? Where you just get thrown a piece of technology from up there for people to use, and it doesn't work. These are people problems, and that's why consultants like us find success, because we're good at dealing with people.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Good stuff. I love all the change management questions coming in here too. Here's a interesting question again from Kyler here. Knowing that Eric and AV study failures, can you share some main themes you see in implementations that are headed for failure? And this is a great question because I know we're talking about implementation planning, right? So if we sort of back up and predict the future and look at any current situation or a client that's early in a process in the planning phases, what are some of the mistakes that they make in that early? Because a lot of the mistakes are made early on and then they just materialize, and then you feel the pain a year later or whatever. So what are those common mistakes or failure points?
I think number one is rushing into a decision. Is a big. You might have a pot of money, and for our clients in the public sector, there's dates associated with funding, right? You got a grant from something, you have ARPA funds, you got a special grant from the state, and it needs to be spent by a certain day. Otherwise, you're going to lose the money. And we're talking about millions of dollars, right? So that kind of adds a certain artificial deadline to a decision. So we recently saved a client from making a bad decision to the tune of $1.4 million. They were going to go buy an RMS, records management system, for the police department because they had the funding. And guess what? The software vendor that was lobbying for funding was first in line to say, okay, buy this date, otherwise you're going to lose funding. So it all smelled bad. So we were brought in to look at the contracts and the requirements and what exactly they're buying, and it was not in the client's favor.
Right.
They wanted 80% of the money up front, and again, in the guise of, you're going to lose the funding, you better pay us. So we had to really go dig through the contracts and what was being offered and what the client really needs. And when you ask questions about, have you thought about process changes, and have you thought about integrations, have you talked to user groups, the answers were no. But there was a push to get this thing bought. So
Right.
that was going to be a huge mistake if we hadn't stepped in.
Yeah.
So rushing through purchase decisions and not talking to end user groups is huge. You can't just make decisions in a silo in IT.
Yeah, totally agree. And back to the rushing decisions, I know you've got the funding issue that you talk about, that a lot of public and private sector companies have. They have a budget within a certain time frame that they've got to spend it. The other thing that you get is sort of that undue pressure from software vendors that say, why wait until February to buy the software when I can give you, it's December right now. I can give
Great deal.
And I bet we're seeing a lot of that right now, actually, in December. It's the end of year end of fiscal year for a lot of software vendors, and they're trying to hit their numbers. So they'll give you a sweet deal if you buy a bunch of software that you may or may not need. They'll give you a great deal on the discount. And without really understanding what you're getting, what you need, are you even going to deploy that software anytime soon? That's the kind of stuff that you've got to watch for. And what we find too is the potential savings you get from making a decision faster. And the software vendors are going to hate that I'm saying this, but that money you save is usually not worth the risk you're taking on in the implementation itself.
Yeah, the cost of not doing due diligence and process design and change management is worse than those discounts you can get.
Yeah, and that's why you have to look at we're all human. We all have economic self-interest. A sales rep is trying to make their number, and they're trying to make their commission. So if I can convince you to buy now, even if that's not your best interest, it's in my best interest, but may not be in yours. You just have to, they're not bad people necessarily. No. You just have to recognize it for what it is.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I think another, we talked about change management. Change management's a big failure point as you get into planning. Another one too is it sort of aligns with what you're saying about not rushing in and not making decisions too quickly. The other one is gosh, I just lost my train of thought. The expectation setting, having realistic expectations for what is this plan really going to take? If a software vendor comes to you with a proposal and says we can deploy Workday in 12 months, is that real? I mean, theoretically, maybe you could do it in 12 months, but is that really going to work for your organization? It's sort of taking the time to pick it apart and say, maybe 12 months needs to become 18 months, not because we want to be slow or delay a project, but because 12 months was never realistic. So let's create a plan and align that plan with more realistic expectations. And then that ultimately will serve you well going forward.
You need to define what done means to you, right? At the outset. What does go live mean? Because the vendor will tell you, we can get this live in 6 months. Of course you can. Is it going to be useful to our clients? Probably not. Right. So if you can't just go by, all the lights turn green, so that means we're live. The definition of go live needs to be the client's definition of go live. What does it mean? And it's not one thing. You have to have 10 things mapped out and the final punch list, so to speak, right? It needs to be defined by the client, not the vendors.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. With vendor input, of course, you can use the vendors' proposals as input, but it shouldn't be the end all be all answer to how you're going to deploy.
Right. And we've seen that, people get stuck to a go live date, but that was defined 2 years ago because that's what they said. And from a vendor perspective, I get it. You need to deploy, implement, and get out of there so that you can start charging maintenance. But reality is different, right? Things come up, elections happen, budgets change, natural disasters,
acquisitions in the private sector.
And so my point is, go live dates set early on in the implementation work plan need to be fuzzy, because as you get closer, you're going to see clearly if it's going to work or not,
right? And
how that date needs to change.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of change management and stakeholder expectation management, because you're reporting to boards, reporting to councils that will question you. Why is this date changing all the time? And you can't be in this space where we have to stick to it because we said that certain thing 2 months ago or 2 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Be flexible.
Yeah. You can't just be that hell bent on hitting a date because you said that was date. Now, ideally, you get pretty close to and you're realistic to begin with. You don't want to be completely arbitrary about it, but you also need to be realistic that like you said, you're going to learn more along the way. Things are going to happen along the way. And then how do you pivot and make sure you catch it? I think that's the key is you need to know it shouldn't come up on 30 days from go live and you're like, oh gosh, this isn't going to happen. You should know months before or whatever that date's not going to work. Let's shift it now before we get too close to it. Because then people start to panic, and that's where you get real change management issues. You get a lot of political, internal fighting and stuff like that, or doubt on the project. It creates a lot of skepticism. So you don't want it to be a surprise. You want to be, proactive about it, but also recognize.
Well, that's where third party project management PMO team comes into play, right? Everybody has their day jobs on the client side. This is another day job on top of your day job.
Right.
So let the experts do it. Bring in the experts, set up a PMO, do this in a systematic manner so there are no surprises.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Here's a question I love. This is from Sam Graham, who's another regular listener on the show. So thank you for joining, Sam. I believe he's in Spain, I know he's from Spain. I don't know if that's where he's at right this minute, but Sam from Spain says, do many organizations still think that ERP is an IT system or an IT project, I should say?
Yeah. And I think that's a fallacy, right? But just because it has the word technology in it somewhere or software in it somewhere doesn't mean it's an IT project.
Right.
These are business projects. These are people projects. And a lot of the CIO community is starting to see this too. Because, you can't expect a CIO, as smart as they are, to understand how every department works or how every function works, especially in governments. You talk about public housing agencies, such a specialized sort of organization that, there's maybe 5,000 of them around the country, and each one of them is unique. Like, really, they do things different way. They deal with the HUD at the federal level, and a lot of nuance goes into managing these organizations. So if you tell a CIO to come replace their legacy ERP system and make sure that, my 5058 reports are getting done right, these people have no idea, and rightfully so, right? So that's when you have to bring in a third party to assist with that. And going back to the question, just because, again, it says software doesn't mean it's an IT project.
Yeah, totally agree. You should be viewing it as a business initiative that is enabled by technology and IT. Yeah. Here's a comment from William on YouTube. You might appreciate this, AV. William says, AV looks like he's about to dispense some vigilante justice. Exciting times. So I'm not sure what you said or did to.
I don't know. I apologize for whatever I said.
I think he likes it. I think he means it as a compliment. I don't know. But I thought that was a funny comment. Here's a comment from LinkedIn, just more of a follow-up to the SAP migration discussion or thread earlier. S/4HANA is quite different from ECC. Changes are night and day. And I totally agree. They are, back to your point, not just SAP, by the way, but a lot of these systems, D365 compared to Microsoft Dynamics. I mean, those are big material changes, entirely new systems that you're dealing with. And it's not a lift and shift. It's not an upgrade. It's a re-implementation of new technology, even if it's the same vendor. Here's a question. I'll broaden it a little bit. This is from Sam Graham as well. I'm going to broaden his question a bit. I'm going to change his question a bit and stick to the original intent. He says, are there enough experienced consultants out there to support the move? He's asking for the move to S/4HANA within that time frame. But let's just talk software vendors in general. All these software vendors that have these, call it arbitrary deadlines to sunset their legacy products. Are there enough technical consultants and technologists to help do it in that compressed time frame?
Yeah, I don't know. So for the first time today, we're going to say it depends.
I know it took us
a
long time to get to
an hour. Depends on what the definition of consultant is, right? There's consultants like us that are not necessarily experts at a particular technology at the core. Like, we're not going to go configure systems.
Right.
So when it comes to those kind of consultants, if you go on SAP's website or Yardi's or whoever's, thousands of resellers and partners. Right. But how many of them are good? Or how many of them have the resources today to come help you with this? So it remains to be seen. I'm not sure with the numbers, especially on SAP, how many are out there. If you go to the suburbs of DC, if you throw a stone, you're probably going to hit an SAP consultant.
Right.
But I don't know in general the numbers. What do you think?
I don't know either. My hypothesis is that, and we're feeling it qualitatively in several of the software ecosystems that there's a strain on resources. I mean, in general, just back up even more, look at the whole macro global economy, the workforce. A lot of companies are struggling with labor shortages and just getting the right talent, the caliber of talent that they need. When you look at technology and you add this perfect storm of all these mass upgrades to, cloud solutions, now you're putting even more of a strain on that. So I think, there's enough data points to point to the fact that there is a strain and will continue to be a strain on finding good resources. And that's even more reason why, back to the planning and the implementation timeframe, you want to add some buffer there because maybe in a perfect world, it could be 12 months or whatever the number is. But given labor shortages and other factors that we've talked about in this conversation, maybe it should be 18 months. And so I think you just have to take that into consideration, that this isn't a perfect world. This isn't a state of a utopia where you're going to get all the resources you need when you need them. And by the way, not just from the software vendors, you're also talking about the internal resources you need from your own organization, which is a whole nother can of worms that we haven't really touched on. Is how do you make sure that you have the right amount of commitment and that the software vendor isn't taking over the product for you, and that you're sort of equal partners with them in that project.
And again, it goes back to beating a dead horse, but planning and really thinking about change management and how you want this project structured. You need to think of these large digital transformation projects as if you're building a new campus or a school building or a police station, and not just treat this as an upgrade or it's just an IT project and it's just software. That's where you get in trouble. That's another mistake, going back to the earlier question.
Right.
You have to prepare yourself to talk to your board, to your council, to be in the newspapers if things go wrong in the public sector.
Right.
And think of it as you're building a new school system or new school building or a police station.
Yeah.
So it's that impactful, it's that risky.
Yeah.
Not done well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you. Well, good. Let's get to one more question before we wrap up. Time is flying by here. So let's, I'm going to skip that question, even though it's a really good one. There's a lot of good ones I'm going to have to skip here. Apologize for that. There's a lot of comments too. Let me come back to one that I think is good. This is about AI again. This is a good hot topic that a lot of people want to talk about here. But this is from LinkedIn, from Mir on LinkedIn. Mir says, what role will AI and machine learning play in ERP solutions in 2024? Do you think, I know we kind of opened up talking a bit about AI and how in government and even a lot of the private sector, a lot of organizations are far behind and they're nowhere close to being ready for a real AI solution. But when you look at software vendors and their capabilities, how far along do you think they are really with the AI competencies?
I don't know. Like, we haven't seen anything. At least I haven't. I'm not sure if you have, but I think the lowest hanging fruit there is reporting and dashboards. You can do it with ChatGPT 4 today. Like, the latest feature is you can build your own GPT and have it do specific, very narrow tasks. And I've played with that a lot, where you can upload spreadsheets and reports and have it do analytics or, charting and graphing for you. That's going to turn into natural language reporting. Again, going back to empowering the users, I'm really excited about this, because think about how reporting happens today. You think of a custom report you want to build, you draw it out and you explain it to the report writer who doesn't understand your business, and it takes months before you hear back, right? That user now will or should be able to just ask the question to the ERP solution.
Right.
Like you ask Siri or Alexa, hey, how many sweatshirts did we buy for Parks and Rec last year? And it should tell you. And it's there today. I know natural language reporting has been built into like tools like Power BI and Tableau for many years, but now it's been given the sort of the oomph of OpenAI and AI engines that can really churn these things out pretty quickly.
Yeah. So what do you think then? Last question I'll ask you, just to sort of wrap this all up, is what are the first steps that I should take if I'm part of a project team or I'm leading an organization that's getting ready for an ERP implementation? We've talked about a lot of stuff that you need to do to get ready. What are the first steps? Like, how do I get started? With all the stuff we've talked about so far, what are some of the steps or the best ways to just get going on that planning process?
So it depends on who you are, right? If you're a CIO that's been handed this project, take a step back, because again, this is not a technology project anymore, because the vendor is going to do a lot of the work for you. Right? You don't have to worry about infrastructure other than bandwidth and making sure you're cyber secure, take a step back and think of the vision. Go talk to the executives, go talk to the end users, and spend some time assessing your current state and creating a plan for this implementation. In the public sector, having to go out to RFP is beneficial in that sense. You're forced to do a scope of work. You're forced to do requirements definition.
Right.
And it's rare that someone just goes out and buys something quickly. So doing the upfront work is really critical, going back to our discussion. And by the way, on our website, we have a handy little checklist on how you get started and how you implement a system. Go download that, please.
Mhm.
And
I imagine Megan will probably drop it in the chat.
I hope she's still on, and
yeah,
she'll drop it. But anyway, there's a lot of material available on Third Stage and Avero's websites that tell you how you go through this. Of course, it's not all comprehensive. You have to talk to us to understand some of it better, or better yet, hire one of our companies to do it for you. But if you're prepping to go into an ERP implementation next year, I think this is a great time to just sit back and think about how you're going to kick this off in January or February, and really have a plan for it, because you can't just spring it on people. You can't just say, next week we're going to kick off this project and it's just an upgrade, don't worry about it. That's the worst thing you can do for yourself.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, and I think having a checklist like what you're talking about is key, and making sure that you have at least started to scratch the surface on all the major work streams that you're going to have to plan for. So certainly the technological piece, laying out what that roadmap is, what are the major milestones, the business process piece, change management, all that stuff. And a lot of times too, one of the first things you can do is just start to get an inventory of what things are like now. What are your current state processes? You may all have it in your heads. You may have some old documentation, but just getting your arms around and just understanding what are we starting with? What are we working with here? And then that's going to springboard into what is the future state? How can technology help? So you don't want to forget the current state, as part of that planning process.
And there's a lot of cool tools available right now. We didn't go into process mining.
Yeah.
It's something cool we haven't really got into, but process mining tools can help you really understand your systems and processes at a deep level. Back when we started doing consulting, we were using Visio. Right now we do BlueWorks Live, and now we have process mining. So if your systems are set up right, you can plug in these tools that will automate this whole process for you, tell you where your bottlenecks are, tell you where your redundancies are. You can use that to really, as a springboard to plan for your next implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, I want to thank you for being here. This is a great conversation. Thank you to the audience. The audience had some great questions here. A lot of them we didn't get to, which I apologize, but you've given us good inputs for future podcast episodes that we can come back and answer some of these questions. So be sure to keep listening to the Transformation Ground Control podcast. Every week we put out new episodes. Tuesdays we do this live stream, same time, same place, wherever and whenever you're watching and listening. You can find it same time, same place every Tuesday. And then this interview becomes part of next week's Transformation Ground Control podcast that you can find at transformationgroundcontrol.com. We'll edit this, we'll add some more content and make it into a full episode. So I thank you for being part of the live production here. This is the first time I can shake a hand in an interview. So thank you.
Yeah, look at that.
Usually it's, virtual and I can't shake hands. So it's fun to do this in person. Thanks for making the trip to Denver. And
absolutely.
Hope you have a great trip. Hope you all have a great week. And I guess I need to look at the camera over here now. Hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Transformation Ground Control.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Eric.
Take care.